The colony of Virelia had never been quiet. Not really. Its dense jungles thrummed with alien wildlife, and the planet's storms tore across the sky with indifferent fury. But now the hum of the colony was broken, shattered by the roar of war. Alien warlords, towering creatures of chitin and muscle, had descended upon the settlements with precision and cruelty. Buildings were reduced to ash before civilians could scream, and every day the death toll climbed. In the control center of the colony, a small group of surviving engineers huddled around the distress beacon. Sweat streaked their faces as fingers flew over controls, sending a signal across the void. Somewhere, someone has to hear us, they thought. Every major galactic power had turned them away. Their plight was inconvenient, unworthy of risk. But desperation left no room for hope. It demanded action. The signal pulsed into space, encoded with coordinates, survival data, and pleas for rescue. It was a scream in the dark, and the universe remained deaf. Yet, in the uncharted expanses of Deathworld territory, the beacon did not go unnoticed. Commander Kyle of the Deathworlders studied the incoming signal with a detached focus. His fleet was small but lethal, each ship armored to survive planetary bombardments, orbital strikes, and toxic atmospheres. The Deathworlders were humanity's edge, the species bred for survival in conditions others would call hell. Kyle's jaw tightened. No one else would come. We will. The ships jumped into the system with a ghostly roar, streaking through the alien skies like predatory comets. Down below, the colony's few remaining survivors glimpsed the fleet against the horizon. Awe and fear tangled in their hearts. These were no diplomats, no gentle saviors. These were humans molded by Earth's deadliest environments, warriors who thrived where others died. On board Kyle's flagship, crew members moved with terrifying precision. Scouts prepped for atmospheric insertion, exosuits sealed tight against poisons, and weapons calibrated for rapid environmental adaptation. The Deathworlders did not rush blindly. They studied, analyzed, and anticipated. Each of them carried the tacit knowledge of survival etched into muscle and mind. They had faced jungles of acid rain, deserts where nothing lived, oceans teeming with predators that could swallow a man whole, and emerged stronger each time. Now they would bring that ferocity to Virelia. As the fleet approached the beleaguered colony, distant fires painted the clouds crimson, the smoke rising like a warning to anyone who would stand against them. The Deathworlders landed quietly, the ground shaking with each heavy descent. Kyle stepped out, surveying the ruined settlements. Civilians peeked from shattered doorways and overturned vehicles, eyes wide, mouths open in disbelief. These humans were not just soldiers, they were apex predators of survival, and they had arrived to reclaim what was being stolen. The first words from Kyle were simple, almost understated, but they carried weight. We heard your call. A ripple of hope swept through the survivors. The universe had turned away, but Deathworlders don't ignore suffering. The Deathworlders moved like predators across the fractured terrain. Virelia's jungles, thick with toxic spores and carnivorous flora, were a nightmare for any ordinary soldier. But for them, it was another challenge to conquer. Commander Kyle led the advance, his exosuit armored with adaptive plating, his eyes scanning the horizon for threats invisible to the untrained eye. Civilians clung to the ruins, peering from the shadows. They had watched their world burn, their protectors fail, and yet here were humans, different humans, descending from the skies as if the universe itself had sent them. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared, paralyzed by the sheer presence of these apex survivors. There was no fanfare, no grand display, just calculated precision and silent menace. The first scouts moved ahead, slipping through the jungle like shadows. Sensors picked up alien patrols, towering insectoid warriors armed with energy blades and spore cannons. Kyle watched as his team adapted on the fly. One Deathworlder hacked the local flora, using poisonous vines to ensnare enemy sentries. Another rigged fallen tree trunks with makeshift explosives to ambush a patrol. Civilians' eyes widened as traps detonated in perfect synchrony. Alien screams echoed across the jungle. Humanity did not just fight, they dominated their environment and weaponized it. As the fleet hovered in orbit, orbital drones scanned the surrounding valleys, pinpointing enemy strongholds and supply caches. Kyle issued commands in clipped tones, each order executed with uncanny efficiency. The Deathworlders moved as one organism, each member anticipating the other's actions. Where aliens expected chaos, they found orchestrated precision. The alien warlord, a grotesque figure of chitin and sinew, received reports of human forces on the ground. His shock troops had been annihilated almost before they could reach the colony. Confusion replaced arrogance. These are not normal humans, he thought, the first spark of fear igniting in his alien mind. Meanwhile, on the ground, civilians began emerging cautiously from hiding. Some carried children, others brought improvised tools, but Kyle's presence was enough to keep them safe. Stay low, watch, learn, he instructed, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Every second counted, every misstep could mean death. Yet even in this harshness, there was hope, a glimmer of survival that had vanished when the galaxy abandoned them. As the day stretched into night, the Deathworlders secured the colony's perimeter. Fires from earlier attacks painted the jungle in crimson light, the shadows dancing across their armored forms. Kyle stood at the highest ridge surveying the scene. Virelia was far from safe, but the first step had been taken. The humans had arrived, and with them came a truth the universe had long ignored. Humanity did not back down. Humanity adapted. Humanity endured. For the colonists, that night was the first without fear of annihilation, though not the last without peril. And for Kyle and his Deathworlders, it was only the beginning. Ahead lay alien forces unlike any they had faced before, each more dangerous than the last. But one thing was certain, they would not fail, because humans never had and never would ignore suffering. The alien warlords' shock troops closed in, their chitinous armor gleaming under the crimson light of Virelia's burning skies. They were fast, brutal, and merciless, but the Deathworlders were faster, smarter, deadlier. Commander Kale crouched behind a jagged boulder, his pulse rifle already calibrated, his eyes scanning the alien formations. Every movement of his team was synchronized, every strike precise. A sudden screech shattered the air. One of the alien warlord's elite hunters burst from the undergrowth, its massive claws carving a path toward the human line. Kale's second-in-command, Rin, lunged forward, rolling across the slick jungle floor and firing a grapnel launcher. The cable snaked around the alien's legs, yanking it off balance. Simultaneously, another Deathworlder hurled a plasma grenade that exploded in a brilliant green flare, scorching the ground and sending alien soldiers flying. Civilians hiding behind collapsed walls gasped, unable to comprehend the calculated violence unfolding before them. The battle was not mere chaos. It was a carefully orchestrated storm. The Deathworlders used the environment as a weapon. Toxic spores were ignited, creating walls of choking smoke. Fallen trees were rigged to collapse on advancing alien squads. Each trap was timed with brutal precision, and the humans adapted instantaneously when the aliens shifted tactics. One alien squad tried a flanking maneuver through a dense grove. Kale anticipated it, positioning sharpshooters in the canopy. Pulse rifles discharged in rapid succession, striking the intruders before they could reach the colony. Another Deathworlder leapt from the trees, landing in the midst of the enemy, and her combat blades slicing through exoskeletal armor with ease. Alien soldiers shrieked as the humans advanced with the unstoppable force of predators, relentless and fearless. From a distance, the alien warlord watched, his multifaceted eyes narrowing. These humans are not just fighting, they are mastering the battlefield, he thought. Confusion and fear began to ripple through his ranks. Every alien maneuver was countered, every ambush anticipated. Their advantage in sheer numbers was meaningless against humans who could read the battlefield as if it were an extension of themselves. Kale signaled his team, and the ambush tightened. Human squads moved like living machines, herding alien soldiers into kill zones where explosive charges detonated with lethal precision. Civilians peeked from hiding spots, witnessing humans perform what seemed impossible, turning despair into strategy, fear into domination. Hours passed in a blur of fire, smoke, and the unrelenting roar of combat. By nightfall, the first major alien wave had been annihilated. The Deathworlders stood among the wreckage, their armor scorched, weapons humming but unbroken. Civilians crept forward, eyes wide with disbelief. Kale lowered his pulse rifle and surveyed the battlefield. "This is only the beginning," he said, voice calm yet carrying the weight of promise. "They will come again, and we will be ready." For the colonists of Virelia, the first clash had shown a shocking truth. Humanity did not just survive impossible worlds, they conquered them. Against the odds, against overwhelming force, the Deathworlders had turned fear into hope. The universe had ignored their pleas for help, but humans had answered, and they did not back down.
The morning sun burned weakly through the toxic haze, casting jagged shadows across the battle-scarred jungle of Virelia. The alien warlord had retreated temporarily, licking wounds and regrouping, but the Deathworlders did not relax. Commander Kale understood that victory would not come from brute force alone. It would come from teaching the colonists to survive, to fight, to adapt alongside them. Civilians emerged from hiding in cautious, tentative groups. Some carried makeshift weapons, blunt tools, scavenged tech, improvised explosives. Others dragged the wounded or gathered essential supplies, following Kale's team as they navigated the scorched terrain. Fear still lingered in their eyes, but so did awe. These humans, these Deathworlders, had turned the impossible into survival, the hopeless into action. Rin knelt beside a small group of colonists, showing them how to camouflage in the jungle and rig traps. "Don't just hide," she said sharply, her tone carrying the authority of someone who had survived worlds that would have killed any ordinary human. "Make the jungle work for you. Make the enemy fear every step they take." A young engineer watched, hands trembling, then carefully set a tripwire of his own under Rin's guidance. When it triggered hours later, sending a group of alien scouts into a pit of entangling vines, he couldn't help but smile, a spark of empowerment lighting his eyes. Kale moved among the colonists, observing. "Civilians are not liabilities," he told his squad. "They are potential. We show them how to fight smart. They fight, we survive. That is the law of life here." And so, small teams of Deathworlders trained the population, showing them how to use the terrain, repurpose alien tech, and even anticipate enemy movements. By the afternoon, the colonists were no longer passive observers. They were participants in their own survival. The alien warlord, watching through remote sensors, grew increasingly frustrated. His forces were no longer fighting only humans. They were now met with an entire population who had learned to anticipate and counter every attack. Ambushes, previously executed by Deathworlders alone, were now multiplied tenfold. Civilians guiding reinforcements, triggering traps, and providing crucial intelligence. By nightfall, Virelia's jungles had transformed. Once a place of terror and despair, it now hummed with cautious preparation and quiet defiance. Civilians whispered stories of Deathworlders' bravery, recounting feats that had seemed impossible. Rin leaping from a cliff to disable a monstrous alien. Kale turning an acid swamp into a lethal trap. Hope, once fragile, had become a tangible force. Kale stood atop a ridge, watching the colony below. Fires from earlier battles still burned, casting long shadows across the jungle. "They are learning," he murmured to Rin. "They will survive. And the next time they see death coming, they will not run. They will fight." In that moment, Virelia understood the full scope of humanity's power. It was not just strength, weapons, or skill. It was the ability to inspire survival, to turn despair into courage, and to elevate everyone around them. The Deathworlders had done more than protect. They had taught hope, and in the galaxy, hope was the deadliest weapon of all. The alien warlords' forces regrouped in the northern swamps, their monstrous forms looming like nightmarish statues against the dim light. Confidence had once defined them, but now hesitation seeped into their movements. Every approach of the Deathworlders had been countered, every strike anticipated. The colonists, emboldened by training and guided by Kale's team, had begun to take the fight to the enemy, transforming fear into action. Kale observed the battlefield from a ridge, binoculars scanning the murky expanse. His pulse rifle rested at his side, ready, though his eyes were sharper than any weapon. "We hit them where it hurts," he said. "The jungle is ours. They think it's a trap, but it's survival itself." Teams split off, moving like shadows through the poisonous mists. The Deathworlders used the terrain to its fullest advantage. Swamp gases were ignited to create smokescreens. Collapsing mud pits swallowed alien vehicles, and carnivorous plants, previously a threat, were coaxed into ambush positions. Civilians guided by Kale's squad participated directly, placing traps, signaling enemy positions, and improvising weapons from debris. Every ambush reduced alien numbers and morale, turning a terrifying enemy into prey. From the swamps, the alien warlord watched, anger and disbelief etched into his face. His elite troops were being funneled into kill zones with methodical precision. The humans and colonists worked as a single organism, predicting movements, exploiting weaknesses, and adapting instantly. He had underestimated them, and the realization terrified him. These humans are predators, and they do not relent. The first major push began at dusk. Kale led a strike team directly into a choke point where alien reinforcements had gathered. Pulse rifles and plasma grenades tore through the ranks, but the team's adaptability made each assault surgical. Civilians activated hidden traps simultaneously, collapsing bridges and toppling alien siege engines. Chaos erupted among the enemy, and what had seemed an insurmountable force became fractured and vulnerable. Rin darted through the fray, her movements fluid and precise. She leapt onto the back of a charging alien, driving a blade through a joint weak spot she had observed moments before. Nearby, a colonist triggered a concealed explosive, sending another wave of attackers stumbling into a pit of entangling vines. The jungle itself seemed to rise against the aliens, guided by human hands. By nightfall, the tide had fully turned. Alien forces retreated in disarray, their confidence shattered, their losses staggering. Virelia's colonists, once terrified and hopeless, now moved with a sense of purpose. They had fought alongside humans and survived. They had learned that adaptability, courage, and ingenuity were as lethal as any weapon. Kale surveyed the battlefield, shadows of burning alien machinery reflected in his eyes. Today, they learned fear, he said. Tomorrow, they will learn respect. The Deathworlders had not only survived, they had empowered others, demonstrating the quintessential truth of humanity. In the face of impossible odds, we endure, we adapt, and we inspire those around us to do the same.
The alien warlord had retreated to his fortress, a jagged spire of black chitin rising from the northern cliffs. From that twisted throne, he surveyed the battlefield below, counting his losses and nursing his growing terror. The Deathworlders had shredded his armies, turned his terrain against him, and trained the colonists to fight. He knew what was coming. Humanity did not chase, they hunted. Commander Kale led the advance, moving through the ruined jungle with the calm precision of a predator. Beside him, Rhine checked her weapons, pulse rifles humming faintly, explosives strapped to their belts. The colonists followed cautiously, armed with improvised weapons, eyes wide but burning with newfound courage. Today, they would strike at the heart of the enemy. The fortress loomed closer, its walls alive with alien defenses, spore cannons, armored guards, and enormous biomechanical beasts. Kale gestured, and the Deathworlders split into coordinated units. One team scaled the cliffs to disable the energy barriers. Another circled through underground tunnels, using the shadows to strike unseen. The colonists manned traps along the perimeter, triggering them in perfect timing to sow confusion. The first wave of defenders charged. Kale's team met them with brutal efficiency. Pulse rifles tore through chitin, grenades flung with surgical accuracy, and combat knives found gaps in the alien armor. The colonists, inspired and trained, took down smaller patrols, signaling positions and reinforcing human dominance over the battlefield. Every strike was a demonstration of the HFY principle. Humans adapt, humans endure, and humans conquer. Finally, Kale reached the central spire. The alien warlord waited, towering, grotesque, and armed with lethal energy weapons. He sneered, confident that his fortress would be humanity's tomb. Kale stepped forward, voice calm and commanding. It ends today. The battle was instantaneous. The warlord lashed out with claws and energy blasts, but Kale moved with uncanny precision, dodging, striking, and exploiting every weakness. His team disabled the warlord's protective systems, rigged traps that turned his own defenses against him, and leveraged the terrain. Collapsing walls, triggering swarms of predatory flora, and using the spire's height to their advantage. Rhine leapt from a balcony, landing behind the warlord, driving a plasma blade into a weak spot she had observed in reconnaissance. The warlord shrieked, staggering, but he fought with desperate strength. Kale closed in, pulse rifle and combat knife working in tandem, exploiting the creature's overconfidence. Each move was precise, methodical, and unstoppable. The colonists watched from a safe distance as the warlord finally fell, collapsing under the combined ingenuity, brutality, and relentless will of humanity. Silence descended, broken only by the labored breathing of the victors. Virelia had survived. The alien warlord's reign of terror was over. Kale looked at the surviving colonists, their faces a mixture of awe, relief, and newfound courage. "The universe turned away from your pleas," he said softly. "But humans never ignore suffering." The battle had ended, but its lesson endured. Humanity's strength was not just in weapons or numbers, it was in adaptability, ingenuity, and the relentless will to survive and protect. On Virelia, for the first time in months, hope was no longer fragile, it was unstoppable. The first light of Virelia's dawn crept over the horizon,
bathing the jungle in a pale gold. The alien fortress, once a towering symbol of terror, lay in ruins, smoldering under the rising sun. Fires burned in isolated pockets, casting long shadows that flickered across the earth and earth. The battle was over, but the scars it left were deep, both on the land and in the hearts of its people. Commander Kale surveyed the colony from the ridge where he had first landed weeks ago. Civilians moved cautiously through the ruins, repairing what they could, salvaging what they needed. They were no longer the terrified refugees that sent a desperate distress signal into the void. They were survivors, hardened and empowered, capable of protecting themselves if the need arose again. Humanity had not just saved them, it had taught them to endure. Rhine approached Kale, carrying a small child who clung to her arm, eyes wide and trusting. "They're going to be all right," she said, her voice carrying a quiet pride. Kale nodded. The Deathworlders had done more than defeat the alien warlord. They had instilled courage where only fear had existed. The colonists gathered to watch the departure. The massive, scarred ships of the Deathworlders lifted from the jungle floor with silent, terrifying grace. Civilians whispered in awe, pointing to the hulking vessels as they ascended into orbit. No banners waved, no speeches were given. Humanity's intervention had never been about recognition or reward. It had been about survival, about answering a call that the universe had ignored. Before stepping onto the lead ship, Kale looked back one last time at the colony. "Remember," he said, addressing both his team and the civilians who had followed so closely behind, "survival is not a gift, it is earned. Adapt, endure, and fight when you must. Protect each other. That is what it means to be human." The ships jumped into orbit, disappearing into the void almost as quietly as they had arrived. Below, the colonists began the slow process of rebuilding. Burned structures were repaired, farms replanted, and defenses reinforced. Every trap, every improvised weapon, every strategy taught by the Deathworlders became part of the colony's new way of life. Humanity's presence had left an indelible mark, not just in the victory over the aliens, but in the spirit of resilience and ingenuity that would guide Virelia's people for generations. Across the galaxy, reports of the battle began to spread. Other civilizations had ignored Virelia's cries, and the whispers grew into legend. Stories told of humans who thrived in worlds that should have killed them, humans who could anticipate danger before it arrived, humans who would never leave suffering unanswered. Fear and respect spread in equal measure. Kale and his Deathworlders moved on to the next uncharted system, leaving behind only the memory of their arrival and the proof that humans were not to be underestimated. In every shadow of the jungle, in every heart that had learned courage from the humans, a new truth was etched. When humanity comes, hope survives. The universe had turned away from Virelia's pleas, but Deathworlders, humans, never ignored suffering. And that alone was enough to change the course of countless lives, and perhaps the galaxy itself.